What's up, everybody? Wes, Dead Air Knipe here with always
Typical Lydia.
Today's show, we're going to be doing the 1972 classic anthology horror Tales from the Crypt. I don't have a funny, I was going to do a Crypt Keeper laugh, but he doesn't do that in this. He's very serious.
No, he does not do this. And as much as I am not a fan of the modern Crypt Keeper, the Crypt Keeper that you picture when I say Crypt Keeper, I kind of did miss that. I love the stoic original OG Crypt Keeper with the hood and the shit and the darkness and the brooding and the hey, but I wanted a little hey, you know?
There is a certain jumping on point for people with Tales from the Crypt, and depending on your age, it depends directly on where you entered it. Now, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that most of our listeners probably didn't get their start with Tales from the Crypt by reading the comic books, but I don't know. Maybe there are some octogenarians who listen to our podcast. If there is, let us know. That'd be interesting. Welcome to the show. It's radio, just like you remember. But most people who would be listening to the show and most modern day horror fans would be familiar with the Crypt Keeper that was voiced by John Kasser for the HBO show that ran in the very late 80s into the 90s, and it became kind of a phenomena on its own. It produced its own films in the Tales from the Crypt universe, Demon Knight and Bordello of Blood, two films in which we've never done for the show. One day, maybe not Bordello of Blood, that is the lesser of the two, but I do really love Demon Knight. And that movie was very much my entire personality for a brief period in the 1990s. But yeah, I wanted to be the Crypt Keeper. And so I became my own version of the Crypt Keeper. But the OG Crypt Keeper from the comic books, a lot more sinister, a lot more withered, a lot more dark. And the Crypt Keeper, what do you want to say about the 1972 Crypt Keeper? By the way, they never refer to him. He won't introduce himself. He knows that names have power, and so kept his secret, but he is credited in the credits as the Crypt Keeper. They refer to him as the Man in Brown if you watch the film with the subtitles on it. But which is very interesting. It's like the King in Yellow, but the Man in Brown. But
I want to write a short story about the Man in Brown now quite badly.
You should do that. That would be great. It's like another sort of dark cosmic entity, but he wears brown. A lot less garish than wearing yellow, although hopefully he'll be just as scary. It's you. It'll be just as scary. But yes, we are going to be doing the 1972 Crypt Keeper. Tales from the Crypt. But this is a Lydia pick, surprisingly enough.
Damn right, because I'm one of those octogenarians that you referred to earlier who was first introduced to Tales from the Crypt by the comic books. My Uncle Marty had left a whole pile of comic books. I guess he brought them when he came to visit my father, because he was the younger of the family, and visiting your older brother and his family for the summer was a thing that people used to do. And he had brought a big pile of heavy metal magazines, old Addams Family, or some magazine where Addams Family appeared within it, the old Charles Addams Family, and Casper, and Eerie, and Vault of Horror, and Tales from the Crypt. Not so much with the other ones. There was a lot more heavy metal magazine, and what I think might have been Eerie, maybe.
That tracks.
And I read those all that summer. Loved it. Loved that summer. Thank you, Uncle Marty.
That's very cool. You have yourself a collection of EC comics. You have yourself a collection. It sounds like you had some stuff from the old Warren comics as well. So that's very cool.
Mhm. Yeah, the Casper, there was Richie Rich too. Um, so there was a good mix. There was a few other comics that I didn't really care too much for because they were like not about ghosts and stuff like that. So yeah, I absolutely love. There was one in particular, and there's two things like from my childhood about this particular film that I'm still on the hunt for, and one has been solved. So two mysteries. One mystery is the unsolved one. All there was a story in those comics from my uncle that had two boys that hated their neighbor, and one of them threw their baseball into his yard and had to retrieve it. That happens in lots of stories. But the thing here was that one of them said, "Hey, check this out." And they took some earthworms and put them in the guy's sandwich. And when he came out to mow his lawn, he ate his sandwich. And then question marks, a giant earthworm comes out of his mouth and he's dead. And I read that story over and over and over and over. I love that so much. And I don't know who wrote it, what one it was in. I would love to see it again. I love the intro panel with the lawnmower and a sandwich on a stump kind of thing. And I remember the end panel was a big one pager with this earthworm crawling out of the guy's mouth. Fucking fantastic. Don't know where it was from. No idea. Haven't seen it since. And the other mystery for me that was Tales from the Crypt related, quite directly related to this film, is for years, and you might have heard me say this on the show before, I had very clear memories of being very young and watching a moment of a movie that scared me with a menacing Santa Claus reaching through a window or something. And he was menacing a lady who was terrified, and he was like a killer Santa Claus. But we've watched a lot of killer Santa Claus stuff, and we could never pinpoint it until finally Wes was like, you know what? This is the pilot episode of Tales from the Crypt. And then I thought, well, I'd never watched Tales from the Crypt that I know of. And I was younger than when the show came out. So then when I watched the beginning of Tales from the Crypt, the movie, lo and behold, a decades long mystery was solved. So I thought we just have to do this for the show eventually, and I'd forgotten about it for quite a while. So yeah, here we are because I remembered.
That's always a really good feeling when you finally are able to pinpoint something. There is something that plagues my brain. There's many things that plague my brain where I'm trying to remember something that I'm unable to. And one of them is about a particular comic book that I had when I was a little kid, keeping on theme to what we're discussing. And in this comic book, there is a group of commando like soldiers, and they are in a hostile alien type world, and they are observing these giant horrible monsters fighting, and it's a succession of these two monsters are fighting. One of the monster kills another one, and then yet another monster comes out of the darkness and starts to attack that one. And then I think one more fight happens, whereas yet another monster comes in and destroys that monster. One of the monsters is some kind of large white primate type thing, but he had large saucer eyes that almost looked like a fucking gibbon but crossed with a gorilla or something. People have suggested over the years what it might have been. Primal instinct. It was not primal instinct. People had made other suggestions. It's not those either. I've Googled it every which way. I've posted the question to Reddit. I have asked people in comic book stores. Nobody knows what the fuck I'm talking about. And yet I have such a crystal clear. That was a comic book that I read over and over and over again. It was the only one I had. So I don't know if it was part of a series, if it was like a heavy metal or a creepy or an eerie or something like that. I don't know. I don't remember. I just remember this, and all I can really recall are images. And it's really frustrating, but I'm glad that we were able to solve this mystery for you.
Oh, it's a wonderful feeling, like you said, to have that figured out. And who knows, maybe someday we'll figure out that weird story that showed up in some 50s, 60s, or 70s horror comic of some sort. Like, man, I'll keep my eye out for this Yeti type creature in white with saucer eyes for you. And for all you know, like, that's the thing. We could be looking in different directions. Like, I might have to look at heavy metal, like, heavy metal didn't publish this sort of 4-color thing that I was thinking of that I remember, but it could have been in there. Or yours could have been a weird one-off of Spider-Man in the fifth dimension. Like, who knows? Like, and we're all looking in the wrong spots. But hey, we are looking in the right spot here. Dead air. I often refer to your intros or the blurbs you write to introduce the show as the West Keeper. You have to write your West Keeper intro, Wes, because you have a great West Keeper voice. And
Thank
I like your
you.
West Keeper voice. The only other Crypt Keeper type person that I love, 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 love is my friend Nelson W. Piles, who used to be the creator, co-creator, original creator of a podcast called The Wicked Library. And I had originally submitted a story to the Wicked Library, and Nelson read it on the show. It did really well. So I ended up writing, I think, well, I've written many other stories, but I wrote 4 that ended up being narrated on that show, and one from the guy that narrates No Sleep, which is like super cool. So, yeah, Nelson has the librarian, which is a deeper voiced, not as hokey jokey Crypt Keeper. He doesn't subsist entirely on one liners as much as double or triple entendres. And yeah, just really, really cool voice work. I just absolutely love what Nelson did with the librarian. And he's a whole character, a whole fully fleshed character like the Crypt Keeper. And I think that's what people like the most about the Crypt Keeper is that he's not just a screechy voiced undead deadite type. He has a whole life and world. And I mean, I picture him in a chef cap. I picture him in a Sherlock Holmes cap. I picture him doing shtick. And yeah, I think that's what people really love about him.
I think that what is the most interesting thing about whether I'm a West Keeper or the West Keeper, that's an amazing compliment, by the way. I've always liked that because, as I said earlier, I wanted to be the Crypt Keeper. I loved the idea of holding court by being funny, urbane, vaguely macabre, and to get people's attention that way. And to be real, as a young kid that watched the HBO Tales from the Crypt series that I watched with my mom every single week on Saturday, and we would do a little hand dance for the theme song. I was quite young. We were talking like 9-10 years old. I was there for the Crypt Keeper. I could give a fuck about the stories. I mean, I watched them dutifully because I knew that the Crypt Keeper was taking the time to intro, but I was there for the puns. I was there for the laughter. I was there for the funny costumes. I was there for him like interviewing Whoopi Goldberg and Arnold Schwarzenegger and all of these ridiculous celebrity cameos that really made this seem like this event in my mind. I was there for the cartoon show that aired Saturday mornings, which I was a massive fan of. I used to make sure that I got up early because they fucking ran it at 7 o'clock in the morning to bury it because it was kind of darker content. And so like, we'll put it on so early that it probably won't offend anybody because not a lot of people are going to be seeing it that early in the morning. So I was all in for this Crypt Keeper. And when I finally was introduced to the host of the EC Comics Crypt Keeper, it's jarring to see how different of a character this could be. Now, this idea of a horror host comes from the radio. This is what inspired William Gaines and people to create the Vault Keeper and the Crypt Keeper and the Old Witch that would make regular appearances in their anthology style comic books, Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror, Haunt of Fear, etc. And they were inspired by the media of their era. And before television, everybody would get together, watch the radio. There was tons of these early horror shows, and not just horror shows, but noir pulpy stories like The Shadow, and that you would get introduced via a host. And then these hosts from the radio and from comic books would then translate into the earliest horror hosts that would be on television, and then the horror hosts that we now see in other films and other mediums, and uh, influencers now on TikTok. Some people take on these personas of a horror host type character. And so it all has these origins in the very early days of horror in media in general. And so it's really interesting to see the Crypt Keeper in these various points in time. The 1972 version, he's even more stoic and less he's not jokey at all. Like in the EC Comics version, he is making jokes, and it's kind of this sinister, hey there bucko, this'll scare you. It's that kind of thing, whereas this, it's almost like he's doing what do you call it, the Seventh Seal, you know, that old movie from the 1950s. Like he's like death playing chess, or in this case I guess purgatory. But before I get too deep into the plot of this movie, you got to tell us, what is this movie even about anyways, Lydia?
It is literally about how this Crypt Keeper has not got nothing on today's Crypt Keeper. I mean, this movie is about how you don't fuck around, because if you do, you're going to find out. That's what these people have done. They have definitely fafoed their way into the crypt. It's another wrong turn story, too, because quite a few of them have made a decision that led them down a darker path. And that has puns for the final segment in this story, too. And the beginning, because we are greeted by the Crypt Keeper quite unceremoniously when this group of strangers end up in the crypt itself. And I like that it actually, like, it's the Crypt Keeper in a crypt. It's Tales from the Crypt. They're not lying. That's what this really truly honestly is. The cover, like the one sheet that you're very used to with skull on it, always kind of bothered me that you don't really see that in this film. But I digress. Let's back it up to what it's really about, is getting treated to this opening credit sequence. You have all of the things that make little Lydia so very happy. Just weird establishing shots from a crypt and of a graveyard and graves. Bach's Toccata and Fugue, or apparently Bach's, because no one knows really where this song came from. And it's just so fitting because it is the most horror kid goth entry. I thought the last movie we did was super goth, but here we are again with like my old ringtone on my phone. Dracula music, right? You know, yeah. And like, so gothy with the most amazing font to set it all off. Sort of like this weirdly serif, like, I don't know, like bell bottom, strange fucking font. Like, I don't even know what font this is. I'll have to look it up, but beautiful in this like orange text. It's just so stark. And it's got those reverse credits that we don't see it often enough anymore. When someone like Quentin Tarantino pulls it off, you know, we recognize it as kind of old timey, but it introduces every single person that had a hand in this film in the opening credits. So you spend a lot of time going from the road through the graveyard to the mausoleum to the crypt itself. Just absolutely lovely.
That seems to be a bit of a British sensibility, because this film is produced by Amicus. Amicus is responsible for a ton of different films. I don't believe the studio exists anymore, although I do believe that they had something of a revival, or they threatened to revive or something, almost in the same vein that Hammer came back seemingly from
Mhm.
the dead. But Amicus had made several of these anthology style horror films, one of which was this film, and then another one that they did a couple of years later in 1974 was for the Vault of Horror. And the reason behind why they did two different adaptations of Tales from the Crypt and Vault of Horror stories, don't get it twisted, they pull from Tales from the Crypt and the Vault of Horror for this film and vice versa, is just because the producers or the studio heads at Amicus were fans of the comic books, which was really nice to see. The important thing to remember about EC Comics was that by the time that 1972 had rolled on, EC Comics was not making comic books anymore. Now, there were some Tales from the Crypt, Vault of Horror, etc., that were beginning to be reprinted, but all of those old comic books from the 1950s went the way of the dodo when EC Comics and the comic books industry itself was persecuted by the hearings that Senator Kefauver conducted under the dutiful eye of the sanctimonious scold king himself, Frederick Wertham, who had written Seduction of the Innocent, an absolutely laughable detritus on the comic book industry and anything that blamed it for everything under the sun because it created, in his words, juvenile delinquents. Lydia, there's nothing more scandalous in the 1950s than juvenile delinquents, but this book would become a bestseller. It would get a ton of attention. It's not directly related to the Kefauver hearings. However, it didn't help because all of this happened within a very short amount of time. Like, we're talking weeks. And then by the time, I believe it was something like 1956 or 57, by the time October of that year happened, the Comics Code Authority was in effect, and they immediately put 800 people out of business. And William Gaines, who was inherited EC Comics from his father, had changed it to producing exclusively horror and science fiction comics, helped create the rules around the Comics Code Authority. It was stupid, but I mean, he did the best that he could, shot himself in the foot, and like ran himself almost completely out of business. The last comic book that they would produce would be in the like early 1960s Judgment Day, which would be the last thing that they got out the door. Well, Judgment Day was the story that was the nail in the coffin, but it was part of an amazing fantasy, which again they had shifted away from horror almost entirely, and then they went to science fiction, and then they just produced Mad Magazine. That was the thing they did. They just did Mad Magazine after that. They never did any other comic books. So by the time 1972 rolls around, people who remember reading those comics as kids, it's now been 20 some odd years. They're now older. They remember being fans of things, and the attitudes around horror had relaxed, and it was time to make something in the spirit and remembrance of the things we loved as children. And so you have the Tales from the Crypt movie.
Which is a wonderful thing. And people who do any sort of recreation or, of course, what's the word I'm looking for? Restoration work on comics are my heroes. I'm not a comics collector. I'm not that well versed in comics, obviously, because I can't remember with this goddamn comic with the guy with the earthworm in his mouth. But a friend of mine, Rachel Ritchie, found a big box of pre-code comics that were in the Library and Archives of Canada during a journalism co-op. And that sparked a whole career for her of pre-code comics restoration here in Canada. Now, granted, we didn't have these amazing properties like Tales from the Crypt and Creepy Eerie, whatever, but we did have some cool stuff. But the US is just like a gold mine of amazing horror, and the UK. So I'm so glad that they reached back, even only 20 years, to their childhoods to pull this out for us. I think that there's a lot in this film that really speaks to me because I've been really getting back into like that Boris Karloff horror anthology that I found at Alice and the Bookman, the just recent Cold Chills anthology by Robert Bloch that I picked up about the same era. at a library book sale. Like, this sort of stuff still exists out there. So even if they hadn't done that hard work for us by creating these anthologies, so thank you, Amicus. I really do want to watch The House of Drip Blood to see if there's any stories I recall in there. Even if they hadn't done it, someone probably would have reached back 40 years into pre-code comics land to pull this all up for us, because we've got our Elvira's and Joe Bobs. They would exist without this particular niche, but they're so much better off for it, so much more rich for it, because it brought those more creepy horror hosts like the Witch and the Crypt Keeper back for us. And horror radio, there's a big resurgence in horror radio, and the restoration projects there are still ongoing, because there's a lot of forgotten and lost media in horror radio, big time. But luckily we had sort of like a triple attack. We have horror radio keeping the stories alive that were featured in comics a lot of the time, or vice versa, and then we have anthology books that die really hard. There's way more of them than one reel of film or audio that could be destroyed or lost, right? So we're so very lucky that a lot of these stories existed in triplicate: radio, comic, books, films, quadruplicate.
You're absolutely right. Before we get into the meat of the film, I just want to give credit where credit's due. If anyone is interested about the era of comic books that I discussed, EC Comics, the Kefauver trials, or the hearings, public comic book burnings, all of that, David Haidu wrote the complete picture on that entire decade with the 10-Cent Plague, which is an amazing book that really will not only give you an idea about what horror comic books were like in the 1950s, and indeed going back all the way back into the 1920s, but it'll also give you a good temperature check for the socio-political nature of the United States in that decade. And it will definitely make things reflect what's going on in modern times as we face book bannings and all kinds of nonsense these days. So if you're interested in that type of stuff, highly recommend the 10-Cent Plague, David Haidu. That's my go-to for all the knowledge that I possess about old horror comics. Now, a group of ne'er-do-wells, a motley crew of
a motley crew by 70s standards, yes. 70s British motley crew.
Listen, I've seen some of those shirt ties look a little loose. Some of those blazers a little dusty. I believe Joan Collins' hair might be askew just so. So they're practically a bunch of thrash metalists.
Ruffians, the lot.
They are on it's like a tour, and they all collectively wander like it's a fucking misty maze of laser tag into a room with fog and the man in brown.
I do love this in that they're all sort of like, I don't know. I don't understand entirely why they were all on this tour. And the first one to really shed some light was just like, I was just driving by and thought I'd stop in for a midday mausoleum tour. What the fuck? Who the fuck does? Like, okay, who the fuck? I would fucking do that. But I mean, do these people do that? No. And this particular motley crew, no. Are they already dead, Wes? Big spoiler alert, here that it's Tales from the Crypt. Kind of have an idea. What's the guy's? That's the Crypt. It's a Crypt Keeper story. Everything's gonna go bad. Are they already dead?
I don't know, because a midday mausoleum tour. One time I was walking around downtown Ottawa with a friend of mine, and we happened to walk past the Supreme Court of Canada, and they wanted to take a closer look. And then we just sort of poked our heads in the building, and they had said, "Oh, are you here for the tour?" And we said, "No." And then, do you speak English or do you speak French? And I said, "Well, primarily English." And they said, "Well, the French tour is about to start, but no French people have shown up. There's only English speakers here. Do you want to go on the tour? It's free." So I said to my friend, he's like, "Do you want to go on the tour of the Supreme Court of Canada?" And they're like, "Yeah." I'm like, "All right." So it does happen. If that could have been my purgatory, but
That could have been that's a pretty lame purgatory, Wes. I'm sorry. Like, sure, I have all the reverence in the world for our nation's capital, but Jesus, Murphy, it couldn't have at least been Spark Street and the death of McGee or something.
listen, it was very educational. Um, did you know that we built that Supreme Court of Canada in the location that it was for the simple fact that they wanted it to be larger than the Supreme Court of the United States? The old Supreme Court of Canada building was too small and dinky by their standards, and they said, well, the Americans had this big one. Let's build a bigger Supreme Court. And that's what they did. But I digress. These people are just interested. They're history buffs or lore buffs. You see, it's not every day you see a mausoleum. I know they're driving in the British countryside, but that doesn't mean anything. But they do all seem collectively confused about why they're even there. They don't have a clear-cut answer about why they decided to take this tour, and they also don't really know how to get out. But don't you worry, don't you fret, dear Lydia, because the man in brown, who will not identify himself, will do the most frustrating thing in the history of conversation and human language. He will answer all of your questions with questions.
Man, or just the whole in good time thing. Fuck you, fuck you. There's never been a response to a question that has infuriated me more. I worked at an engineering firm at one point, and I did something, and the girl said, "Oh, we don't do that particular case like that. Even though we do most of them like that, we do this one like this." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "You'll find out." And I was like, "No, you'll tell me." And she got mad at me for not accepting her fucking shitheel answer of, you'll find out someday. Oh, you'll find out. Fuck you.
It's like all of a sudden she became the Riddler. Like,
Yeah.
You'll have to figure it out, Lydia, man. That's ridiculous.
She did that a couple times, and then I went to the owner of the company and was just like, I can't take this. You need to explain to me all of these things right now, because I'm about to leave. I'm about to walk out of here because of the Riddler. Yeah. No, that's not how you run a business.
I'm here to talk to an adult, and I guess until I find one, I'm going to not be very productive. I guess we don't want us to be here. Now, but the Crypt Keeper is very funny because, funny in the sense that it's an annoying way to talk to people, and why anyone would listen to them or is beyond me, because he's like, why are you here? Is that all? Is that all? And then stodgy British men. Well, 4 stodgy British men, 1 lady. And one of the weird things that I've noticed about people discussing this film over the years is if you bring up the Tales from the Crypt film, the one story that people seem to bring up is this first story. And I don't know if it's because of the historical significance of it being the first evil Santa story that is on film, which makes it historically important to horror, or if it's the fact that Joan Collins is in it, which I'm trying to think. She didn't do a lot of horror, or really any horror up to this point. I think she was kind of more regarded as a serious actor. Is that what the novelty of having her in this is?
That, or just the brutality of it, because it is just so cruel and heartless, and maybe they weren't used to that sort of cruelty. Being on screen with the bright red. Is this a Kensington blood? Is this the sort of Kensington blood we hear tell of? How horribly bright and red and visceral this blood feels?
It's gotta be, because one of the most stark things about this film, or supposed notable things, is its use of primary colors. It almost comes off as a giallo. It makes sense because we are dealing in the early 1970s colored films were coming in with those extremely vibrant Technicolor Eastman style coloring processes that just made everything almost hallucinatory. It was so bright.
Is it the sort of that coupled with the modern woman, the sort of take of rising up against the men that have pushed them down, and she's finally taking a stand but still gets stymied by one of the most ancient patriarchal figures? Or is it the implied threat to a young child? Even though it's not any real child violence here, it is the implied threat. Maybe that was what was so startling. Or I guess it's just a culmination of all of these, or primacy, or like recency bias. It's the primacy bias, I guess. It's the first one in the anthology. If we had started this out with the last entry in the anthology, maybe that would be the one we remember so well.
I honestly think that, and we'll get into this more as we discuss the individual stories. We've done anthology style horror films before, and we'll break down each one of the stories as we go through the picture. I do think a shuffling of the stories would help a little bit, because I feel like, maybe I'll save my major criticism for the end, but I feel like a lot of energy, let's say, is bled out of this film by the last story. It just, I think there's a time for suspense, and it's not at the very end of the movie when you've just had 4 relatively breezy stories.
Yeah, and it makes the next one seem all the more stodgy in comparison. Now, if I have right, no, wait, the next story is the most stodgy of the bunch. But yeah, this one, all through the house, Joan Collins is great in it, and I love the fact that we are in bright, livid Technicolor, because we get to see this amazing blue eyeshadow look. Is it green eyeshadow? Maybe it's a green. She's just beautiful, absolutely beautiful in this. And I think that we have a really good juxtaposition of this very typical mom and a very beautiful wife, and just how stone cold she's about to get when she kills her husband.
This film is an adaptation of a story from the Vault of Horror that originally appeared in 1954. One of the interesting things about this film, and what I think is so great about it, is each one of these stories is handpicked from EC Comics. That is one of their signature O. Henry style horror shorts. So the way that these stories break down, quintessential EC Comics. And so I think that them kicking off or including a story like All Through the House is really great, because we have a classic scenario, Lids. We have a much older husband. We have a young, beautiful, glamorous Joan Collins. And we have money. He is a wealthy, well-to-do gentleman who adores his wife, but his wife, you see, is cold blooded and only cares about collecting insurance money. And so she's going to bludgeon him in his stupid head on Christmas Eve, the saddest time to murder your husband, while your blonde daughter is upstairs, like, oh, mummy, it's Father Christmas. She calls him Santa Claus. I was like, you should be calling him Father Christmas. But is Santa here? Nope, nope. And she has to proceed to clean that orange blood up. And when you combine the almost neon red orangey blood plus all of the primary colors, the whites, the orange stairwell leading up there, the vibrant lights of the Christmas tree, the party hats that they're wearing, and the fact that she is dressed in black. It is just this absolute gorgeous tableau of imagery in a sequence that doesn't really have a lot of dialogue.
No, it's true. The most of the dialogue at this part, because she's trying to like kind of sneak around and clean up a murder scene for fuck's sakes, with her daughter sleeping upstairs, comes from the radio with one of my favorite tropes from any horror, any flavor of horror from any era, really. If there someone turns on the radio and there's escaped mental patients on the loose, I know I'm gonna have a good time.
There is something that I think is so great when a film has music in it, but the music is part of the narrative. I love when a song is playing. In this case, we get a string of classic Christmas songs because she is listening to the radio. And then that music gets interrupted. We interrupt this broadcast for a news bulletin. And yes, there's your escaped mental patient. By the way, she takes the time to heed the warning by bolting the door and then closing the sheer curtains in between the door and the hallway. And I would make fun of this, and even though the example I'm about to give is not exactly a one-to-one correspondence, but when I was growing up and I was in the house by myself, we had a glass door, almost like a screen door, but it was glass. And then we had a wooden door, and there was three large peephole circles, like large. You could
Mhm.
fit like an owl in them. They were big, and through the entire length of my body. So from the sidewalk, you could see into the house if the lights in the hallway were on. You could see all the way down. And if all the doors were open, you could see all the way down into our kitchen. I hated it. I hated the idea that I could be in the kitchen or the living room and someone could look inside the house. So there was a door. We had a mud room uh, in the front of the house in the foyer, and I used to close that door so people couldn't look all the way into the house when I was in the house by myself because I used to get scared. So, in her mind, that curtain helps.
Yeah, it helps in her mind, but yeah, I love the layout of this place. I really do because you do get some sort of semblance of privacy, and like the door is literally right there. So that curtain is unfortunately doing the wrong thing. It's blocking her view of who has come into her house or who is going to be at her door. The menacing Santa makes an appearance, and this I really love because this is what my childhood fear was made of having this filthy, menacing, angry Santa at the windows while she's cowering underneath. Like that, just that image alone stuck with me so well. And I must have been very young watching this. I don't know if it was on television because it would have been before we got a VCR, I think. But my mom was also in the habit of renting a VCR. So I don't know if this was a rented tape. I don't because I wasn't involved in the machinations of how movies ended up in our house until I was probably 10 or older. And I think I was younger having seen this. So I don't know. I'd have to look back and see if, we aired a lot of BBC stuff here in Canada. So it could have been aired on anything. But this terrified the living death out of me and continues to stick in my mind. I still haven't seen the remade version that was for the miniseries. I'll have to watch that or the series. It wasn't a miniseries, the series proper. I'll have to watch that and see if it has the same effect because this all these things probably appealed to a young child too. There's a child involved, there's a dead father, that's terrifying, all this blood, someone menacing, the Christmas carols. Is that something that speaks quite vividly to a young mind? And the juxtaposition of death in the family and the household and mom being the perpetrator of that with an evil Santa and Christmas carols, like all these things that you can readily understand make it so powerful.
The iconography of Santa Claus being in this is definitely the thing that I think would stick into a child's mind very, very vividly, even if you couldn't remember anything else. So it makes sense to me that the image of Santa Claus, a dirty Santa Claus, looking through a window, the arms reaching through the door. I feel as though Joan Collins' character reacts fairly well to when the Santa Claus guy is attacking, and then she almost immediately kind of forgets he exists the second that she manages to get him out of the door, close the windows, etc., because she is going to hatch a plot, you see, Lydia, because this is a golden opportunity. Things like this don't, evil giant Santas don't just fall in your lap every day, especially the same day that you happen to kill your husband for the insurance money. She is going to be able to blame this guy who's an escape maniac, who is actually on her property, and she can prove it, for killing her husband. All she's got to do is pitch his ass down into the basement, collect it. Isn't this great? I was thinking about when she was cleaning this all up, like no DNA, no, like what, fingerprints, like I guess, but they would also, all she would have to do is wear very big sunglasses and have a handkerchief, and they'd be like, "Oh, ma'am, you've been through enough tonight. Go on home now." Like there's no criminal profiling. There's no, even if the guy said he didn't do it, they'd be like, "Yeah, you're going to the loony bin, buddy." Like they're not gonna, like there's going to be no investigation. She would definitely get away with it scot-free if her wiener kid doesn't open the door, which her wiener kid opens the door.
Well, yeah, that's what wiener kids do. I really do like her collecting the blood in a little shot glass and washing it all out. And we have sort of a Lady Macbeth moment where she's having a hard time getting the blood off her hands, which, just really good visuals, really good storytelling. Again, still not a lot of dialogue until she goes to call 911 and realizes her stinking daughter is out of bed and has let Santa in, Mommy. He's here. He's here. It's just so adorable.
She's so excited. She disappears toot sweet. I wonder if she,
Mhm.
we don't even hear the little girl scream. So I'm wondering, did she just vanish? The writer stopped writing her into the scene the second the Santa's in there, so Joan Collins could get killed. What's with that phone? There's a lot of weird space age design for things, but it almost looks like she is like calling from a conch. Like I don't really understand this phone's design, but the
Yeah, I
colors are
like
great.
that it's seafoam green, the seafoam green conch phone. I mean, didn't you have one? Everybody did.
We
They were
had
all the rage.
a duck. It quacked when it rang.
Oh my god. That is adorable. Like it's this Bakelite sort of arts and crafts movement meeting Art Deco that informed mid-century modern just after,
Yeah.
right? So
Well, you could assume
hideous.
you could assume that Joan Collins' character was like a mod from the 1960s, right? And so she would have had that hyper chic, futurist 1960s aesthetic that was bleeding into the 1970s, kind of mixed in with this old money aesthetic that this older gentleman had. And it's so funny. It's so sad. They really milk it for all it's worth because he seems like a guy who genuinely loves his wife, calls her the most beautiful wife, like gets her a nice present. And well, she herself is killed for her trouble. They don't really linger on this death. And then weirdly, they don't linger on the deaths of too many people.
No, but they do linger on their nonplussed look on their face when they return to the crypt to be like, "So, where were you going? Oh, 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 I thought so." Kind of thing. That the look of like bewilderment of like, "How did you know? Why am I here? Am I already dead? Did I do that?"
It's interesting because you get this question in your mind, or at least I do, when things like when a character in a film or a television show starts to tell you a story and all of a sudden you're in the scene. Did they all sort of mentally get transported to this scenario, or were they just
Yeah.
sitting here as like, and then you are going to speak with your daughter? And I'm imagining the crypt keeper like, "Oh, hello, daddy, Father Christmas will be here any minute," and then you're going to say, Not if you don't go to sleep, little girl. And then you're going to be like, oh, daddy, oh, mommy, he's here. And then the killer's going to come in and he's going to grab you just like so. Like, is he acting everything out and doing voices or what?
That would be so awesome because he would do a shitty job because the guy barely moves, right? Like he has a one note voice, and super monotone, and a cardboard cutout face. So I mean, I it would be hilarious.
He's so stern. I like it though. But the whole time I was watching the film, I just couldn't help but wonder if he was acting this out, if we were all kind of mentally transported there. But that is nothing to worry about because we have more pressing matters to attend to, Lydia. And we have to deal with a no good Nick of a man, Carl. It's his turn to figure out what he's doing here. Who is this? What's going on? How do we get out of this place? I'm not going to answer any of those questions. However, I am going to tell everyone here that you're stepping out on your wife. You're going to disrespect your marital vows.
Is he ever? And with probably the most beautiful woman in this, like Joan Collins is Joan Collins for sure. And there's other women in here, but I didn't even know this Angela Grant actors. I don't know anything about Angela Grant. I had to look her up independently of like the credits or Wikipedia or anything like that. And I haven't looked any deeper, but maybe it is just my affinity for a raven-haired beauty or a woman who drives a fucking car. She drives a fucking car, Wes. What kind of woman between 1940 and 1972 drove a car? This woman. Susan Blake is the name of the character that he is stepping out on. And not only is he stepping out, he is moving out. He's moving across country. All of a sudden, it's the literal daddy went out for cigarettes and never came back kind of story. He fibs that he has to work late or he's going out of town for business or something, but he is moving house with this other woman who is so beautiful.
I'm glad that you brought up how beautiful Susan Blake is because when I tell you I was captivated by this woman and the way that she looks at him, even when she's driving the car, I was so distracted by how gorgeous she was that it was all I could think about when they're driving the car, he wakes up from a nightmare and they get into an accident was, is Susan okay? I don't care about Carl whatsoever, but I wanted to know
Yeah.
if Susan's okay. Now, this is actually a story that was taken from Tales from the Crypt from 1951. This story, I feel I'm the most equipped to talk about because I've actually narrated this story or a variation of this story for my old show from years ago, Panels of Blood, where I did selected Tales from the Crypt. This was one of the stories, and how it differs in the comic book versus what goes on in the film is very subtle, but by and large, it's the same concept. In the comic book, it is two men in a car, one of whom happens to be too tired to drive. They fall asleep, they get into an accident. And the shift to the POV of Carl as he moves through his environment, looks to the crash, encounters a car, people have this horrid reaction. And I started to sit up and pay attention and say, oh my God, is this, since the beginning is different, I wasn't sure. But all of this POV stuff, okay, he's going to get to his wife's house and his wife is remarried and is horrified to see him. Now, in the comic book, that is the Carl returning to his home. It looks all dilapidated and abandoned. So it's not exactly a one-to-one correspondent, but when he finally encounters Susan, we get that reveal at the end, and yep, that is the exact thing that happens in the comic book version.
I love the device of her blindness. She lost her sight in the accident that killed her lover. And that is the only reason she's not one of the many people who recoil in horror, and why he gets an explanation. Had she not lost her vision, he wouldn't have had the explanation as to why, until he saw his reflection, I'm sure. Like, the title sort of helps inform the end of the story, in that she isn't reacting like other people, explains to him that he's dead, and he looks into his reflection, and we're treated with a ghoulish visage.
It's great classic EC comics, but it's not the best cadaver that we get in this film by a long shot, because there's one that is so amazing that it really overshadows this story. But what I like about the reflection of death's inclusion in this film is, at least for me, when I think about Tales from the Crypt, this is one of the stories that I remember the most fondly. It's often included in those Dark Horse compendiums. So if you're a fan of Tales from the Crypt and you have any of the modern day reprintings, there's a good chance that this story has made the cut.
And I can see why. It's just so classic, so well written, has these little devices in it that make the end just this clinch so perfectly. And it's yet another shitty husband story.
There's something really interesting that I had noticed as well. Whereas when we were looking at our previous story, everything was so bright, everything was so vibrant. The colors were all primary, and we were dealing in, like I said, I called the coloring hallucinatory. This entire story in Reflection of Death is muted. It is shadows. You are in woods. You are seeing dark cars and traffic, only lit through headlights. You are going into Susan's dark apartment. You are standing outside of brightly lit places from the shadows of the driveway of a house. You are underneath a bridge, scenes only lit by fire. So I found the contrast extremely interesting, and it gave this sequence. Not only do I happen to love this sequence because I happen to love this story from Tales from the Crypt, but I also loved how juxtaposed to the original story, this is just so dark.
And unlike a lot of modern anthologies that have guest directors for every segment or what have you, this is all the same people. This is all the same stage. It's all the same studio. It's all the same everything. They just really accomplish a lot with lighting and tone and music. This is a lot less frantic than the first one, and it is a lot more noir, not just because it all takes place at night, and still has sort of that giallo feel that kind of runs as an undercurrent in the first one due to its use of color and blood. In this one, it has the mood down pat without any of the other frills. It's a very, very pared down, very minimalist story.
Yeah, like there's even sequences that, maybe because of the POV, it reminds me a lot of Peeping Tom. Just like
Mm.
just a lot of those weird dark sequences. But one of the things that's also interesting is this is a very breezy story. Not all of these stories are the same length. This one seems to kind of come and go quite quickly, and I like that in the sense that it doesn't overstay its welcome. But
Mhm, mhm.
when we're
Reminds me a little of that Going My Way in Creep Show, the Hitchhiker one.
Oh man, I love Creepshow. Would you ever want to do Creepshow too? We should think about that. Um, I would love,
Yeah.
I would love to do Creepshow too, because I have like some fondness for that, and I rewatched it recently, and I was like, you know what, this fucking movie rules. I don't care what anybody says.
Yeah, I would definitely be down for that. Now we'll have a tonal shift coming with the next segment, which also features like a very big name actor. So maybe the scene is stolen here somewhat, but it's sort of is a whole other tone as well, because we're taken out of the nighttime giallo feel. We're taken out of the jet set 70s mom who's going to step out into the world on her own kind of thing, killer Santa Clauses and stuff like that. We end up in a stodgy sitting room with a jealous jerk that lives across the road from a dustman.
This is the most British
Yeah.
of all of these stories. Like, very much you find yourself in this kind of twee English countryside, and you got James, who is just it's almost Shakespearean in the in like he's like Iago. He's like, I hate the Moor for no reason. He just hates them. He's gonna and when you're introduced to Grimsdyke, who played by Peter Cushing, one of the interesting things is like I understand that Peter Cushing had made a huge name of himself for being in a lot of British horror. So perhaps it's not all that interesting that he is in this film, but I never hear the fact that he's in this whatsoever. And I don't really hear much about this story really when people are talking about this film, but it's one of my favorite stories because this is obviously also taken from EC Comics. This is from The Haunt of Fear from 1952. And the old story of jerk kills innocent person or by way of torment causes an innocent person. Like speaking, this is Father's Day, baby. This is fucking,
Yeah.
this is Cadaver 1 year to the day. Back from the grave EC Comics story. This is as classic as EC Comics horror gets. I would almost bet that they did a fucking dozen of these goddamn stories. Either jealous husband, jealous wife, jealous businessman, in this case, jealous neighbor, somebody who's not supposed to die gets killed, a fucking zombie comes back a year later to get their revenge. And I don't mean to jump to the O. Henry style twist, but I just wanted to talk about that from the jump because the way that James randomly hates Grimsdyke, who, by the way, we're introduced to him like with dogs, playing with children. The kids adore him. He's got puppets. He's just a really nice, popular old man who adores his dead wife and talks to her like she's there. You couldn't write a nicer guy if you tried. And yet James is just like looking through the window like fuck this prick.
No, and that's what drives home the selfishness of James so poignantly in that it's one thing to like look across at your neighbors and be like, God damn it, why don't they clean up their yard? Or wow, they're so noisy over there. Everyone's been in a position like that to look over the fence and be like, wow, I wish other people would move in there. Or, wouldn't it be nice, I guess, if you're like a baron like this, to own that property as well, which I guess is the point. Like it makes no real sense that he hates him so much, and that's what makes it so painful when we meet such a sweet old man. If this was like watching Trick or Treat, where our neighbor is a jerk and murdered children, that's something you can look across your neighbor's fence and wish that they weren't there and not help them out if they're in a time of need and all that, you know and it's different, but this guy is so, so, so sweet and so gentle. And it is a time when the local garbage man can come home from work and play with all the community's children. And no one thinks anything's bad or weird because there's nothing bad or weird. He's just genuinely sweet. And he does a civic duty. He refers to him often as a dustman. Not only is he like a junk collector, a little bit of a junk collector, but that is his job. Like he had a job. So he was a civic worker. in this community and probably an important part of the community because a lot of people turn out for his funeral. Not to jump ahead either, but yeah. I mean, he is just a sweet gentleman. Sure, he's old and at the end of his career, quite honestly, because we have one of the older looking Peter Cushing.
Yeah, this isn't, you know, Dr. Frankenstein, Van Helsing. This isn't even Peter Cushing from Shockwaves. This isn't even
No.
ex-Nazi Peter Cushing. This is Peter Cushing looking quite frail and was a small man, right? Like and he's really leaning into that frailty and that age and that gentleness, and you you see how systematically his dogs are taken away. You see how he loses his job. You see that people start suspecting that he's inappropriate around the children and stuff like that. And and then to cap it all off with the fact that, you know, he is in this turmoil and the only person that he has to speak to is his dead wife, who he speaks to her photo on the mantle. And it's so sad, but I find this story incredibly effective. Now, in the comic books, they don't normally have a lot of time to, you know, a lot of the times you're dealing with 8 to 12 page stories. So you don't really have the time to pull the taffy on really demonstrating how shitty James and his father are to just get rid of this blight from the neighborhood. Oh, they assumed his house is a pigsty because of how he runs his life and the job that he has. And so eventually they write him some mean Valentines. And these mean Valentine's lids that he gets on Valentine's Day, I feel as though like when people get like hate comments, hate tweets, when people like stitch mean videos about you, this is what the end goal is. Imagine you read so many mean comments, people saying my head's too big or something, and I fucking string myself up because of it. Because eventually, when no one sees Grimsdyke for a while, James and his father enter the home, and they almost seem surprised that this place is spotless. I would have assumed it would be a mess. Like, just because someone is a dustman and has to collect junk for his job, why would you assume that his house is? That's not the same thing. It's like I'm a produce clerk. I don't have a bunch of like dust and dirty boxes in my place because, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, so, and he's hung himself. He committed suicide because of those mean Valentine's lids.
And quite sanitized. They only show his feet dangling, which I think for the longest time in horror and film is all that you saw of something that suggested a suicide. So it is uh, quite clandestine, luckily for viewers who are sensitive to that sort of thing. Yeah, and they would have probably expected his house to be messy with all those dogs he had because he had every stray dog in the neighborhood in his front yard, which I didn't understand the problem the dogs were posing or the problem he was posing at all. But they seemed to be taken aback by what a sweet old man he really was that they finally realize. And then it's his funeral, which I guess is where the comic book story might have started with a little bit of flashback to how sweet he was and how vindictive his horrible neighbors were. But I didn't I really understand why he was there at the funeral until somebody says, "Oh, it was nice of you to pay for it." It's like, "Oh, the least I could do, he was a neighbor after all." And it's like, "You fucking slimy turd."
I think maybe if I were to guess, I think that they wanted him to move, but they didn't necessarily want him to die, or even if they thought they wanted him to die, let's say, well, perhaps it changes you when you see someone's body. You see the result of your torment and you're looking at a corpse hanging by the neck, that would be hard to look at, especially a corpse that has been there for a few days. So I could see how perhaps the reality of that would hit, and the guilt of that would, if you were a wealthy person, in your mind try to absolve yourself of your sins by giving the man a decent funeral who had no other family to his name.
True, because a year later he does act quite guilty. A year later he's acting quite terrified just with the memory of it all. And I do know that finding a dead body does change you, whether you had a hand in that in any way, shape, or form or not, specifically a hanged person. That's quite terrifying, quite distressing, very terrible thing to witness. So, yeah, a year later, they're sitting around with a roaring fire at their charming country home, looking across the way at the nothing that is Grimsdale's old house. No one's in there anymore, and they feel so sad about it because it's a year to the day. In fact, I don't know why they're getting so stoic and why James is so distraught. I mean, it must have affected him more than we'd have ever known, even though he paid for the funeral, because he still thinks about it to know that it's a year to the day. He's not, like, dating anyone, so I don't know I forget that it's Valentine's Day when I wasn't with anybody, and I sorta forget about it now because it doesn't Valentine's Day isn't that important really, but, I guess it had a different importance in the '70s to '50s.
Well, I think even though this predates things like criminal profiling, I think there might have been enough understanding to know that the anniversaries of crimes hold significance to the perpetrators. It could cause erratic behavior, it could cause feelings of fear and anxiety and guilt, and they say that it's a good opportunity to catch a killer returning to the scene of the crime after
Mhm,
a
mhm.
year. So, particularly the fact that they can look out at Grimsdyke's home and kind of see the emptiness of what they had done. I'm convinced at the very least that it makes narrative sense, even if they don't feel even if they don't feel guilty for what they did per se. I still feel as though it makes narrative sense that they are feeling erratic. Now, Grimsdyke is going to get his revenge when we see the camera panning to that gravestone and you know what's going to happen. I really wish that they had taken more time to show the emergence of a body, but I understand that you want to save it for that big reveal for when Grimsdyke is standing over James's desk. But I genuinely feel the look of Peter Cushing in this makeup with the vacant eyes and the exposed teeth and the screen. This is a great classic EC monster cadaver vengeful spirit.
Mhm, and not normally how you see Mr. Cushing either, right? You usually see him looking dashing, even from the beginning of his history in film till the day he died. He was a good-looking, dapper gentleman. This is a fun. This is the sort of fun that you'd say in Trick or Treat Again, having a A-list actress dressed up like a monster. I think this would have been the same sort of thrill in 1972 to see Cushing dressed up as a monster and doing a really, really good job of it. This story reminds me a lot of the Mummy story in Tales from the Dark Side, where you've just got someone trying to worm some sort of benefit out of someone's unfortunate and tragic passing, and they get what's coming to them. And in one sense, someone gets their brain pulled out. In this one, somebody gets their heart pulled out. I really do like the graveyard scene too, so I totally agree. I wish they would have spent a little more time because, that's what we want to see as horror fans in the graveyard at night when we know something's afoot. The evil has been done to somebody, and they're going to rise up and get their revenge. To see that emergence scene is always my favorite thing. We don't see a lot of it, but we do have that crinkly hand reaching up from under the grave dirt. It's enough.
It is. We get ourselves a body reveal. James has been killed, viciously killed, some of that bright blood ruining his baby blue cardigan that he was probably very proud of, and a note left for his father. Happy Valentine's Day. You were mean and cruel right from the start. Now you really have no. And we see that you reveal the paper down a little bit more, and James's heart has been ripped from his chest and placed there as the final word. It's still beating
It
somehow.
is still beating, which is weird. I remember being a kid, my father had taken the heart out of a large fish and put it in a cup to let us see it beating for a little bit because it was still live fish when he was cleaning them. And it was very interesting, but it didn't beat for very long. This fish heart in a jar kind of trick that my dad was showing us as kids, little science experiment, if you will, for the young'uns. It didn't stay beating very long. And this, I mean, yeah, it's ridiculous. I think that it would probably stay beating for all of like 3 minutes, maybe. But yeah, it's visceral though, and that is always a treat if you're a bit of a gore hound. It's rare in the 1972. That's rare to see this sort of stuff, and it's not the last we'll see of innards, which is really, really fantastic, actually, that this movie gets a little gory here and there. Not balls out gory, but guts out gory.
Man, are we going to get some guts in the very next story? This next story is fucking hysterical. There
It
is
is.
there is something that I cannot articulate that is so funny about the escalation of this story. But I was howling with laughter as almost it's almost cartoonish. In fact, it is cartoonish how this story goes. This is Wish You Were Here. And yes, it is an adaptation of a story from Haunt of Fear, but more directly and to the point in which it almost becomes meta.
And yeah, yeah.
They talk about the classic story, The Monkey's Paw, which is what this is really based off of.
Which is fantastic because she has not read it. The girl who this monkey paw story is all about. Like, you would think that in the original monkey paw story, if the mother and father had read the monkey's paw story, they wouldn't wish their son to return because you've been warned, right? And this, we get some dreadful warnings, and she tries to outsmart it. And there's nothing better than a monkey paw story where people are aware they're in a monkey paw story and they try and outsmart it. It never goes well. We know this. And now this makes it incredibly meta now because we've had even more uh, instances of people knowing full fucking well they're in a monkey's paw story or any sort of three wishes from a genie story and knowing that there's going to be a trick to it, knowing that the devil gets his due, knowing that the genie's going to trick you, knowing that the monkey's paw is going to bring back a cadaverous wreck, but still trying to outsmart it. And I love this. I do love this because it is just, oh, we've got this statue here that we got to sell off all our things. We got no money. So we're moving and downsizing or whatever. And we're going to sell off this ancient statue that we've never actually looked at before.
Well, I was telling you earlier about how sometimes I have DVDs in my collection where I'm like, what the fuck even is this? This is that. This is if one of my DVDs could grant wishes.
So that would be like 63 wishes, man. But you know the monkey paw story. That's the thing.
Yeah, but she's also an idiot. So there is an aspect of this film that's fucking hilarious because Ralph, who this story is about, he is this kind of unscrupulous businessman who's made a fortune, but now he is losing money, and um he needs to get his friend Gregory, who's like his financier, right? Like his lawyer or whatever, to help him try to get some more money. But they want but he needs to downsize it. They do have this statue that they believe, they don't really believe it, but almost in a joke, his wife, Enid is her name, she just wishes for lots and lots and lots of money. All of a sudden, Gregory's going to call Ralph on the phone. And I would almost suggest, or when you're watching the story, like, oh, he's going to tell him that his fortune has reversed in business, and all of a sudden they have this huge influx of money. It's one of those conversations where you called me to tell me to get in my car and drive to the office. I would say, no, just say it here. We're already talking. Why do I need to come to your office? Or at the very least, tell me what I'm going for. But no, it's the classic, no time to explain, get here as soon as you can. And so Ralph gets into a vehicle and traverses the beautiful English countryside, gets into a car accident, and dies. Now, don't you worry, don't you fret, because as Gregory will inform Enid when he arrives at her home, after saying that her husband has died and she's in hysterics. And then he says, well, perhaps this isn't the best time to bring this up, but he had quite a substantial life insurance policy, and you have quite a bit of money now, which is funny, but she's not interested in money. This woman married for love, and also feels guilty because she made a wish for lots of money. She is set to inherit a lot of money based off of his life insurance, but she doesn't care about all that. She wants to make a wish. Now, Gregory has read The Monkey's Paw and will explain to her about the parents and about wishing their son back from the dead and how it's a bad idea, but she is clever. She wants to say, I want him to be back before the accident. And then, like a fucking cartoon, a bunch of funeral people march in, put down some stands, and just drop the coffin in there, say he died of a heart attack before the car accident, so his body isn't mangled. Bye. What funeral service does this?
No funeral. Well, no, there's probably funeral services where you're having a wake in your home that would do this, but normally the body isn't embalmed at that sort of funeral. That sort of death care is very specific to specific families. And yeah, but they're not going to do it in such a shitty stoic way to like literally plunk the coffin down in the middle of your living room. It's a very, very surreal moment in this story, because you'd like to think the monkey paw, and the way the monkey paw normally works outside of its supernatural capabilities, like the first two wishes are supposed to hook you, but things seem natural. Like, you wish for lots of money and you win a lottery, or your husband dies horrifically in a car accident. But it's that he had this heart attack. And I love the scene of him being chased down by death on a motorcycle. Like, how modern, what a modern idea for the time, that death doesn't come in a caleche. Death doesn't come as a banshee in the sky. Death doesn't come as a hooded, cloaked figure with a scythe around the corner. This is a death's head motorcycle maniac, man. I mean, oh, so cool, so fucking cool. And I guess this is the skull that is on the cover that we only see really for a split second, but we can really understand the terror he would have felt. So we even know, without another word, when she says, I want him back exactly as he is before the accident, we were there, we know he was terrified. So you're just gonna have a screaming man who's terrified. What I forgot, though, that the consigliere rightfully points out, oh no, he's been embalmed. Wow, he's just going to be filled with a burning fury of chemicals. That's so terrifying.
That image. This is where you are in. It's Ren and Stimpy. It's fucking like it is itchy and scratchy. It is
Or
absolutely
the man who wouldn't die from the guinea pig series. That's what it reminds me of quite a lot.
Wow. Yeah. By the way, the motorcyclist character reminded me a lot of like the bikers in that film Psychomania. I don't know if you've ever seen that film. It was from 1971, and I'm curious. I didn't have a chance to look it up or anything like that, but I'm curious if it's another British film. So I'm curious if like there was any sort of cross production or anything like that. But it is a very iconic image, and I think that when you're looking at images of this film, the biker is probably right behind the Santa looking through the window in terms of it's probably more well known in terms of just the images from this film than the Crypt Keeper themselves, because it's just so iconic and so cool. So I wanted to also just agree with you, basically. Like, I really like that sequence. So he got embalmed like an hour after he died. Is that how quickly you know more about this than maybe anybody, except for someone who actually works in the funeral service industry? How quickly do they embalm you after you die?
Not that quickly. Like, not that quickly at all. If you're getting embalmed. No, it's you need a medical examiner first. Like, that's not the same step. It's not like they put you in the body bag and immediately put you on a slab and start jacking you full of chemicals. And they have some preparation to do first, because they don't just entirely jack you full of chemicals. Like, it takes some time to sew your jaw shut and all that stuff. And you have to sew up other things too, and put in other supports and mortuary makeup. I don't know if the makeup is done before or after, but I'd like to think it's done fairly soon, perhaps. I don't know if it's all done at the same time, because it takes time to actually get the effluvia out of you and get the chemicals in. It's not like it is under pressure. Usually they're using gravity, or at this time we're probably using gravity to fill the body, which would take some time, but they're not like pumping it at high pressure. You need some time for all that blood to settle and stuff. Like, it takes quite some time to embalm somebody. Not this rate of speed that they're dealing with in this, especially the supernatural rate of speed, because like those guys would have been parked outside her house with an embalmed body waiting for her to wish him to come back at the speed that they came in through her door.
There's this sense of cartoon reality, almost a dreamlike sense of reality in which these wishes happen in rapid succession. She wants him to be alive forever. So he resurrects, gets the body, died of a heart attack, not of the car accident, resurrects him. He is in incredible pain because he's been embalmed. And then she, in fits of hysteria, goes to grab a sword and just starts hacking the shit out of him. And we are talking fully exposed intestines. We are talking severed hand, and he just keeps howling in pain while Gregory's like, "You said you wanted to be alive forever." And so you get the sense that he is just trapped in this cadaverous, embalmed body now that has been mutilated and exposed, and he can't do anything. And so he's just stuck, immortal and in agony for all time, except maybe not, because we're back in the Crypt Keeper's crypt.
Man. So, where were you going today? What the hell? I really liked that segment because it gives a little bit of mirth. because we had come from something that was quite dark. Well, all the stories are quite dark, even this one, of course, even with its cartoonish sensibilities. And you wonder, like, where does she go next? Does she just like pile all his body parts in a box and gag him so he doesn't scream all the time and put him in a box and throw him in the lake? Like, what did she do? Now she's got all that money. But this one is so much darker and so impeccably acted, so impeccably wrought, such a unique story. I mean, it's not without its plot holes. Don't get me wrong. This is not, um, an ironclad trap here that we're building, but it is maybe a precursor to Saw films. Do you remember anything quite like this where someone is entangled in a trap of their own making, so to speak, because they did something terrible and people are getting sort of revengeance on them and they have to like think about what they did, but there's no real way out and they're doomed, like the Saw films?
I can't really think of anything off the top of my head, although I'm sure one of our listeners is screaming at us for a really obvious example. This story is downright Hitchcockian. It's the
Yeah.
bomb under the table because at no point do you not know where this is going. And when the trap is set, it is not a surprise. You understand almost immediately from the capture of Shane what is going on. The languid, downright methodic construction of this death trap that is occurring, you're kind of just waiting for the thing to happen. There is no twist. The twist is nothing. This is pure suspense. This is also, of course, adapted directly from a Tales from the Crypt story from 1955, The Blind Alleys. And this story, I really, really think is misplaced in the film. And the reason why I think it's misplaced is I don't know if it is the longest story, but it certainly feels like the longest story. Secondarily, I feel like its reliance on suspense, which it does effectively. I want to be clear. I don't dislike this story. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying, in terms of the pacing of the movie, a lot of these stories were quite quick and breezy and even somewhat lighthearted. And I'm kind of thinking of like a quick type of story to get us out of here, almost in the same way that Creepshow does it, where their last story is the rich dude with the bugs, right? It's like a very high energy story that caps off the movie. So I don't know where to place this story, but I just feel the end is not the place to put it. But what do you think? Am I way off on this, or?
No, I agree. And I think it just would have even, move all those stories up a little bit. So we start out with what feels like the most brisk story, in the Reflections of Death story, or put this at the beginning and put the Christmas story at the end. Though either way, I believe the Christmas story should have been the end. Maybe it's just that the cycle of seasons that we're used to here in North America, where the winter is the end, so to speak, and I think Christmas is the end of the year. I think that would have just been a really good fit. Uh, but it is nice to have that longer story or longer feeling story at the end. It's tough because people setting up anthologies, I've set up collections where you want the stories to flow into one another really well, and I guess they were more concerned about the flowing in than they were the flowing out, because what you're ending on is just equally as important as where it's coming in from the next. Where we kind of tie movies together when we review them on the show, but we're not like beholden to it, right? So maybe they were just like, well, where we're gonna stick this story, I don't know, we'll just stick it at the end because it doesn't matter as much where we're going out, right? Maybe.
The interesting thing is that all of these stories were handpicked by the people making the movie at Amicus, but the final script approval was done by William Gaines himself. So the like editor in chief of EC Comics had the last word on all of the stories that were used in this film as part of the agreements to hand over the rights to make this movie in the first place. So, at the very least, William Gaines, master of anthology horror stories himself, approved the inclusion of this story and maybe conceivably the placement. I'm not entirely sure. But it also seems like kind of a missed opportunity to put a big actor, like perhaps save Peter Cushing or Joan Collins for the last story, since they would have been like really, really famous. Fun fact: Peter Cushing was originally in line to do the Crypt Keeper, but
Oh,
yeah, that it was originally supposed to be his role, or that's what they wanted him for. But he liked the story of Grimsdyke. He wanted to play that character instead, so he said, "I'll do the movie, but I want to play this character," and they gave it to him because it's Peter fucking Cushing.
and you
This
don't say no. You kind of have a big name here with McGee. Is it Robert McGee or Patrick McGee? It's some sort of Scottish kind of name. Patrick McGee, who you may recognize from A Clockwork Orange. I recognized him from something, but I wasn't sure. It was Chris that said that the guy from A Clockwork Orange, the guy in the wheelchair. And I hadn't recognized him, but he looks no different. Absolutely no different. And he has a really stunning performance in this one because he is just so stoic and methodical and angry. He's an angry, angry gentleman with good reason because of the really, really poor treatment of the visually impaired in this home for the visually impaired at the time. And it just really speaks to the way that people used to treat people in sanatoriums of one way or the other, whether it is a home for unwed mothers, a home for the visually impaired, a home for people with cholera, people with polio. Like, people were just mistreated so terribly in these places that were under the guise of a bastion of health and care. And we always worry about how the elderly are being treated in retirement homes or assisted living facilities here in North America now. I mean, it was just a torturous nightmare in the 70s, and we knew that, unless we paid a lot of money, and even then it was no guarantee. Here it seems to be not a very expensive facility and 10 times as nightmarish. So I really do like the revenge theme of this story and where it goes, just because it is such a nightmare, especially with aging parents or having ourselves aging, wondering where we're going to end up in life, especially if we have an affliction like blindness.
that's I was gonna ask you before we got going on this sequence, but you answered my question as if places like this were real, because like they call it rather tastelessly, but I suppose in keeping with the times, it's the home for the blind. And I was looking at it as, well, this looks like an asylum slash prison slash orphanage for like old blind men, except no one, like, they're not given proper beds, and they're not given proper food, and they're not given like proper facilities, anything. And Rogers is a military man, Major Rogers, and he has come to take over the running of this, which he does with a militaristic efficiency. And that includes being extremely tight on finances. And that means not giving any money to improve the living conditions of the people who live there, even when asked directly to do so. He says that things are simply not within his budget. Yet, of course, he dines on the best food and has wine, and his dog eats better. His dog Shane, a beautiful dog who is very well trained, who every resident of this home fears, because at a command, Shane can and will attack them.
I love this dog. He is so gorgeous. He has such meaty paws, and he's so fluffy and soft for a German Shepherd. He's got to be some sort of weird strain that I'm not familiar with, or maybe doesn't exist anymore. Much like the Grey Nuns Monastery, the mother house here in Ottawa that used to house blind people. The Grey Nuns were kind of famous for having a much more gentle approach to the care of the invalid. And at like I have terrible nightmares of Grey Nuns, specifically Madame Briere herself. And being here in Ottawa where she spent time is just terrifying to me on a daily basis. I am screaming inside because I am, for some reason, scared of Grey Nuns, probably because of the idea that they ran sanatoriums like this, even though they were the helpful ones and the good ones and the helpers and the ones that actually gave care. But these homes like the one that Helen Keller had lived in as deafblind, the Canadian National Institute for the Blind definitely oversees a lot of better care, and there are still assistive care homes for people who have different disabilities, including vision impairment or hearing impairment or both. And so those sorts of things really have evolved. They still exist, but they have really evolved. And even at the time, the Grey Nuns Mother House is a gorgeous building here in Ottawa, and just across from the Mint, behind the gallery on Sussex, you'll find the old Mother House there. A gorgeous building for a good cause at the time. And like I said, things have really, really changed. But yeah, these places absolutely existed. I do like the idea here that we have this sort of like a government guy put in to take care of this home. He's going to run it into the ground. He is going to eat gourmet meals in front of everybody. He's going to treat his dog better than he treats the people that live here. And it's just so angry making, especially because I have many friends that work as personal support workers, and if they're people that they worked with or for were ever in any sort of situation or put in a situation with a headmaster like this, you want to just punch them right in the teeth. It's so angry making.
He has this line where he says, "In this place, even a one-eyed man is king." And it really goes to show you where his mentality is. However, his neglect will not be without consequence. After many times of many of the blind men, of the visually impaired men, asking for his help, pleading for his help, being chased away, being threatened, being bullied, they come to him in the middle of the night because one of the people was coughing and has now grown still. He has died of hypothermia, and it is just simply a matter of fact. This man is dead. And so this enacts the plan of these men to get the revenge on him. And the good major is going to come to his office, and they're going to collect their plates full of various meats, and they're going to lure Shane away, a little trail of little meats, and they're going to lead him all the way down to the basement, and they're going to lock him in this small room with no food and no water. And then they are going to get the good major, and they're going to basically shove Rogers into a room himself. And the one thing that I kept thinking of this entire time, while Rogers and then eventually another dude are like carried away and locked up into a small room, was like, I would dummy each one of these old ass fucking men. They're all so weak looking. How are you? I don't care if there was 100 of these fucking dudes. I would dummy all of them. I just couldn't believe that they were getting shoved into rooms by these old guys who were like all 100 years old.
No, exactly. And it would have made more sense if they would have felt for his head and then hit him with something, right? Or like hit his head against something to knock him out and put him in there, instead of just sort of like barricading him and sort of like jockeying him into position with their white canes, which is an interesting visual for sure. Like the whole thing gives us interesting visuals, like from them collecting the little meats as a breadcrumb trail that for us to visually follow, for Shane following the literal breadcrumb trail, another visual like trail for us to follow, and us seeing all of these white canes is like another sort of visual breadcrumb trail that is leading him into this cell, for lack of a better word. And we know that Shane is in the room next door, which I just kept expecting the dog to pull full on Jason Voorhees and just crash through the wall. But because he's a great big dog too, right? But it seems at this point almost like painstaking because we've followed these 3 visual breadcrumb trails already. We're just like waiting for the final one while they construct the jigsaw fucking trap, basically, slowly.
Very, very slow, very languid. You were spending a lot of time listening to Shane bark, and you were listening to the sounds of slow nails, slow hammers, and you're watching these guys just very slowly shuffle around while their leader makes vague threats. Eventually, Rogers, I mean, you know exactly what they're doing the moment Rogers gets locked away. You see what they're doing to Shane. Rogers saying that if you don't feed the dog, please feed him because he's going to go insane. He's going to go berserk. He'll go wild. And of course, they're saying, we know. I mean, yeah, that's kind of the point. And then, yeah, they turn it into a bit of a jigsaw killer. They also kind of combine a little bit of psychological warfare because they keep turning off the lights on him while he's going through their, Machiavellian labyrinth because he's getting caught on razor blades. It kind of reminds me of that old Audrey Hepburn movie. What was it? Wait Until Dark. Where it's basically like a home invasion film in which she's blind and these criminals terrorize her and try to break into her home. Anyways, the thing about that is they cut the power to the place and then they're all on the same playing field because none of these invaders can see. Nominated for an Oscar for that movie. But anyway, it's a good one. But this,
I'm gonna have to check it out because right up there with like, Don't Breathe. That's what it was. I was gonna say Don't Blink, but Don't Breathe. Yeah, it's right up there with those.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. Weirdly, I don't mean to get on a tangent about Wait Until Dark, but Audrey Hepburn did that movie and then didn't do another movie for 10 years, but she was nominated for an Oscar for this movie. It's a straight up home invasion movie from the 1960s and one of the most famous actresses in the history of cinema is in it. So it's worth people checking out. If you've never seen Wait Until Dark, I highly recommend it. But we don't have to wait until dark to know what's going to happen, except they cut away from it. And this is an opportunity, I think. I mean, this is like Eyes Without a Face, in which you're watching a man get mangled by a pack of dogs as the finale. They could have used this opportunity to get really gruesome with it, but they don't. And they just have him call out like, Shane, no. And then boom, we're back in the crypt with the brown man.
Man in brown. Yeah, they could have had at least Shane pulling on some bloody nylon stocking or something to make it look like guts or something, or viscera or fascia. But yeah, terrifying. I love the idea of this razor blade hallway, and then he almost attempts to run again through the razor blade hallway. Really good visuals for that final scene, and that, like, for a story about blindness, it is interestingly the most visually interesting segment, really, honestly. Unless you find it too slow, then it could be kind of like a chore. But yeah, we are all back in the crypt, and We get fire in the eyes of the skull that is the giant stone throne the crypt keeper is sitting in. I mean, I want to spend more time here. Unfortunately, it is definitely over. We're not going to spend any more time in the crypt, unfortunately, but it is so fucking cool.
And we are going to learn that this was a little bit of a jokey joke, a little bit of a fibberino, because the crypt keeper wasn't warning them about the dangers in their future. He was only explaining how they ended up here in the first place. You see, this is no ordinary mausoleum tour. This is not even purgatory. This is hell. And not quite as a visually spectacular reveal as another anthology where they're in hell, which of course, Tales from the Hood, one of the greatest devil reveals ever. But no, motherfuckers, you're gonna fall back into a pit of fire, and and we're all done with that, as everyone, I guess, resigned to their fate. No words to be shared. They all just languidly shuffle to their eternal damnation, while the crypt keeper breaks the fourth wall, looks into the camera and says, "Who's next? Perhaps you?" It's like the most he emotes throughout the entire movie.
And it's just such a weird, lame ending, even for the time. I mean, even 10 years, 20 years previous, people would have just been laughing at that. But I guess that's what they want to inject after what could be quite horrific to a lot of people, or sad. You want to just give it that little upbeat at the end to send them on their way.
I will say that even though it's not very in keeping with the crypt keeper that they had formatted beforehand in the entire story of this film, it actually is the closest to how he would be in the comic books. So in a weird way, it's almost as if they thought people would be going to this movie not knowing that it was called Tales from the Crypt, and you wouldn't know who this cloaked man in brown could possibly be. And then when the reveal happens, which again, they never name the character, but he looks to the camera and it is that "so long, dear readers." It's that crypt keeper-ness that is present in the EC Comics version. He's far more, I mean, it's not, again, the HBO crypt keeper, but it is certainly a level above what the crypt keeper was doing in the beginning of the movie. And yeah, then we're out of here, and then we get fire and brimstone and gothic font, and we're done this.
And the toccata part of toccata and fugue in D minor. The fugue part is actually super fucking metal if you're into Bach, and not Sebastian Bach. If you're into actual Johann Bach,
I
definitely check out the fugue part of toccata and fugue. The ending's kind of lame, but yeah, the Dracula music, that's what toccata basically is. We get treated to some really cool music, like you said. I do like the ending of this. It's short and sweet because we already had the credits at the beginning, and I wish every movie would do this in a way. I mean, sure, you won't have the fanfare while you finish your popcorn in your seat and then slowly trudge your way up the theater aisle, but it would be nice to have, lights on and you're out of here for real. I enjoyed it quite a lot, all of the segments. I really like that if you're interested in the Santa one, you can just watch the first 20 minutes of this and get a really good little short holiday horror out of it if you want. You can jump forward and get a little Valentine's horror, which there's not enough of in this world. And you could enjoy each segment as it is, really honestly. But as a whole, it's a really good anthology. I'm excited to someday for us to get to The House That Dripped Blood and, other ones. And like you said, Creepshow 2. I'm definitely there for those.
Yeah, I would definitely love to check out more anthology horror. It's always fun to do and makes for good episodes. But what do we got next for them?
Coming up next, we are going to do Late Phases, a fantastic werewolf story, which, the inspiration of the last segment in this definitely is what inspired that choice, because we had a few contenders, which we'll be getting to soon before we get into any sort of Stephen King-a-palooza for the year, because it is getting summery, springtime here, and we want something a little more lighter fare. Late Phases is a really underrated story, and I don't think enough people have seen it. And it came up in conversation before, and because it fits with the theme, I think we'll go there next, because it's nice also to get to another werewolf film, which there are not enough of either.
I'm also really excited to check out Late Phases, a film that I discovered in my DVD collection. Who knows where it came from? Perhaps from beyond the grave. We don't know.
I'm waiting for you to find the movie that would grant you 3 wishes.
I would just use it to wish for infinite episodes of this very podcast.
I would think that you'd wish for more Billy bookcases to house all of your movie collection, really, honestly.
On that note, I'm Wes Knipe.
And I'm Typical Lydia.
And you've been listening to Dead Air. If you like this show, you can find more episodes and other content on splatterpictures.net, Spotify, or wherever you download podcasts. We also upload all episodes to YouTube now, if you'd prefer to listen that way. You can find us across social media like Instagram, X, and TikTok, and the show is edited by Lydia Peever and hosted by Lydia Peever and me, Wes Knipe. We'll see you next time.
Music by Anorex at anorex.com.